Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. Another episode of Treasures of Reading, in which I will wrap up what I've read these past 2 months. During January and February of 2025, I read 10 books, with a total page count of 4,444, which is quite a magical number. 2 non-fiction books, 1 literary fiction, and 7 fantasy. On this chart you can see the overview with the number of days it took me to read a book. As always, at the end of this video, I will show you the overview of everything I have read since the beginning of my journey into fantasy. I finished the reading year of 2024 on a high with the Empire Trilogy by Raymond E, Feist and Janny Wurts. And this new reading year got off to an equally great start with The Arc of a Scythe, a trilogy by Neal Schusterman. The first book, Scythe, was published in 2016 and has 446 pages in my edition, the one with the beautiful cover illustrations by Kevin Tong. Thunderhead, number 2, was published in 2018 and has 520 pages, and the final book in the series, The Toll, with 636 pages, was published in 2019. I very much enjoyed these books. The fact that it only took me about 2 weeks to read all 1,600 pages, which is really fast for me, speaks for itself. Even though I felt that the author here and there cut some corners regarding the credibility of some elements of the story, he does a great job at creating a thought-provoking and original plot. Life and death get a completely new meaning in the future society Schusterman describes, where humanity has conquered death, disease, and aging. The so-called scythes are tasked with the somber duty of gleaning, which is a nice word for permanently ending the lives of people. Scythes are chosen and trained to uphold strict ethical codes and to act without bias or malice. This basis forms the growing grounds for a great and mind-blowing story. In my dedicated review, I got into what I liked about each book and what to me was less successful. To me, this was one of those trilogies I read as one compelling and fast-paced story. And each book was a step up compared to the previous one, with new significant characters and an amazing plot development. It is no surprise that I didn't have to think twice about reading all 3 books back to back. In my detailed review, I already felt like I merely scratched the surface of the amazing depth these books offer. My rating for the books are as follows. Scythe, 91 points out of 100. Thunderhead, 93 points out of 100. And The Toll, 94 points out of 100. This is a remarkable trilogy. Not perfect, but highly entertaining, well written, and it provides us with lots of food for thought. If you want to see a more detailed reading experience, please check out my video on this trilogy. While reading The Toll, I also read Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander. This book, which is subtitled A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife, is one of the many successful recommendations from my wife. She mainly reads spiritually oriented books, and every now and then she pushes one my way. Proof of Heaven was published in 2012 and has 194 pages in my edition. Dr. Eben Alexander, a highly respected neurosurgeon with decades of experience in the field, is a firm believer in the supremacy of science. To him, the physical brain is the one and only source of consciousness. His views change dramatically when he contracts a rare and severe case of bacterial meningitis that left him in a coma for 7 days. During this time, he experienced a series of vivid and otherworldly visions that he later interpreted as a journey through the afterlife. This encounter, which happened while his body was practically brain dead, challenged his previous convictions and led him on a journey of spiritual discovery. The book is well written, although I felt that it lacked some emotion at certain points because of the scientific narrative style. This, here and there, got in the way of trying to experience what the author was going through. Other than that, a very impressive and memorable story. I rate it Proof of Heaven with 84 points out of 100. I will not be doing a separate video on this book. To me, the ultimate question whether Alexander's account is real or not is not a very interesting one to me. Whenever I read one of these remarkable books like Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani, I am impressed by the possibilities they offer. But each time I come back to my own life and experiences, I have to admit that I simply do not know if our consciousness will continue after we die. I have read too many convincing books to simply dismiss that notion. On the other hand, I don't have any experience myself that corroborates the idea of an afterlife, or whatever you want to call it. I suppose I will see what happens when the time comes. About my next read, I'm not quite sure what to say really. I'm talking about my experience of listening to the Andy Serkis narration of The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. Even though I really enjoy listening to this familiar story, I gradually begin to understand that audio is not really my jam when it comes to reading books. I miss too much, and I have not yet found a way to memorize snippets by underlining or scribbling something in the margins, the way I do with a physical book. This has become my way of reading over the years, and I find it very difficult to adjust to an audio format. It is a completely different experience than reading a physical book, and I begin to understand that I prefer the latter. I started listening to The Fellowship of the Ring on November the 1st of 2023 and finished it on January 21st this year. So it took me almost 3 months to get through one book, which is indicative of how low on my list of priorities audiobooks are. I will listen to the remaining 2 Lord of the Rings books, but after that I just may stop listening to books altogether. Nevertheless, it was great to get back to Middle-earth with Andy Serkis, and I particularly loved his version of Tom Bombadil. As with The Hobbit, the Peter Jackson movies have more or less taken over the story in my head, which is a shame. So, very glad to have made my reacquaintance with Tom Bombadil and other parts of or developments within the story that had evaporated from my memory. As for rating this book, I will go with 90 points out of 100. My appreciation for Tolkien's works nowadays is mainly rooted in nostalgia and memory of how huge its impact was on me when I read these books for the first time. Even though the meaning of Tolkien can hardly be overrated. To me, the present reading experience on its own is merely good to great. So for this one, I will not make a separate video. Then on January 18, I started reading my next Guy Gavriel K book together with my good friend B.J. Minton. I believe that A Song for Arbonne is our 5th buddy read, if I'm not mistaken. Our experience during previous buddy reads differed quite a lot, where I usually was enjoying the book better than B.J. did. But this time, we were very much on the same page in our appreciation for this book. I needed 10 days altogether to read the 620 pages in my edition. It is the 5th book I read by this author, and slowly but surely, Guy Gavriel K is turning into one of my favorite authors of all time. The story is set in the land of Arbonne, which looks a lot like medieval Provence and Languedoc in the south of France. In Arbonne, arts like music and poetry are highly revered. The matriarchal society has a deep veneration for the goddess Ryan, who embodies love and beauty. In the prologue, the young Bertrand, Duke of Thaler, abducts his mistress, Aelys, in a mock attack. She is married to Urte, the Duke of Miraval. This forbidden love and its dramatic consequences form the basis of a long-standing feud between both dukes. Political intrigue, cultural and religious differences lead to conflict with Goreau, a country north of Arbonne. Against a diverse background, we follow Blaise, a mercenary. His history and personal quest are gradually revealed as he learns to appreciate the Arbonnese way of life. In the apotheosis of this beautiful story, all comes together in an extremely satisfying way. The story is filled with highly emotional and gripping scenes, strong dialogues, and it makes a reader think about bigger issues like the difference between a patriarchal or matriarchal society. But the beautiful and poetic prose that GGK displays is no doubt the main reason for loving this book. At least, that's what it does for me. The book starts very slow, but after about 150 pages or so, the reader gets a better idea of who the protagonists and antagonists are. Kay doesn't explain things, so you have to go along with the turn of events to find out the whys and wherefores of the story. Around halfway through, the book began to overwhelm me, because it touched upon my personal life in so many ways. The ending of this book is simply perfect. Everything, the big threads as well as all the loose threads, comes together. It looks like this early into 2025, I have already found my book of the year. I gave it the highest rating possible, 100 points out of 100. Guy Gavriel Kay does not write easy books. They require concentration, but man, once you take the effort, the reward is tenfold. During my read of A Song for Arbonne, I have cried. I was angry, even furious at times. I laughed out loud. I was touched by beautiful rituals and poetry, and I could feel the love some of the characters feel for one another. It is the best fantasy book I've ever read. Please check out my dedicated video on this exceptionally good novel. Here I go into detail about the historical background, and I give a couple of quotes that illustrate the greatness of GGK's prose. Next, I read a non-fiction book by Oliver Sacks titled A Leg to Stand On. It was first published in 1984 and a second edition was published in 1991. And I can say straight away that this was my most disappointing read of these first 2 months. I really enjoy reading the books of this British neurologist, but this one didn't do it for me. It's 206 pages, took me about 12 days to get through, and even then I skipped some parts. The book is about Sax's ordeal when, in the Norwegian mountains, he badly injured his leg. The beginning, when he relates his struggle to try and get down from the mountain and how he miraculously is saved by a couple of locals, is very good and entertaining. After his surgery, Sax goes on and on about his neurological experiences when he feels that his leg is no longer part of his body. In my opinion, the book could have been much shorter and much more to the point. Sax goes out of his way to repeatedly tell the same things in different ways and words, which became terribly boring. The author's extremely elaborate and repetitive narration gave me the feeling that I was running in circles and getting nowhere. Also, his excessive use of medical jargon was off-putting. In the end, I found perhaps 30% of the book truly interesting, and the rest I just didn't care for. I gave A Leg to Stand On 49 points out of 100, but I still will be reading his other books I have left on my TBR shelves. At the end of January, I finally got around to reading Joe Abercrombie for the very first time. The Blade itself The first book in his massively popular First Law trilogy kept me busy for more than 2 weeks. I'm afraid that the real thing didn't quite live up to its promise. The anticipation brought on by many enthusiastic booktubers had clearly been too high. During the 515 pages, I kept waiting in vain for the true story behind all the seemingly separate scenes to kick in. We follow characters like Logan Ninefingers, or the Bloody Nine, who comes into contact with Bayaz, the first of the mages, Sand Dan Glokta, Jezal Dan Luthar, and Logan's buddies under leadership of Three Trees. These different POVs are seemingly unrelated to one another, and also their stories themselves don't seem to be going anywhere as well. Everyone's motive remains shrouded in mystery. Still, I really enjoyed reading this book, mainly because of the very strong character work and the highly entertaining dialogues. But if this book taught me anything, it is that I am clearly a story-first reader. No matter how good the prose, the world-building, or the characters may be, as long as I am not seeing what the main story truly is about, I lose interest. I may even start wondering why I have to read all these pages. Abercrombie's characters are highly memorable and relatable, even though they are not likable in the least. I particularly enjoyed the Sand Dan Glokta chapters. His cynicism, nihilism, and dark wit are extremely well portrayed. His incessant questioning about why he is doing what he is doing, and his repeated foreshadowing of his corpse found floating by the dogs are very entertaining. His actions imply total obedience to his superior, but in the meantime, we don't really know where his allegiance truly lies, supposing he has any. So, the prose is very good, which is why I kept on reading. Still, the blade itself left me with some sort of empty feeling because of its lack of direction or meaning to the events. Even when after 400 pages a memorable visit to a mysterious tower put me on the edge of my seat, the anticipation died down again after that, because the book continued with the loosely connected scenes of loosely connected characters. In the end, my first acquaintance with Joe Abercrombie was rather disappointing, to be honest. In my video about my first experience reading Joe Abercrombie, I go into further detail. At the end of that video, I explain how difficult it is to give this first book a rating. It seemed to me that I could only do that after having read all 3 books. By the time I'm recording this video, I have about 150 pages left to read in the final book, The King's Last Argument. Unless something drastically changes in those final pages, I believe I can put a number to this book now. I give The Blade itself 73 points out of 100. When I started this trilogy, I had anticipated ratings higher than 90 points, but here it is. The second book, which I'll get to in a minute, was an improvement, and the third is the best so far, so let's move on. In between the 2 First Law books, I read the latest novel by Eowyn Ivey. In preparation for this, I did a video on her first 2 novels. Her debut, The Snow Child, is an all-time favorite of mine, and I have to say that Black Woods, Blue Sky comes very close to the brilliance of that first novel. I am hesitant about making a separate video on this book, because given the number of views, I can say that my trips outside of fantasy are not the most popular content on this channel, which is fine with me. I mean, some videos simply have to be last in line, don't they? Thankfully, there already is a great breakdown of this book done by Gronsky Books. I'll put a link to his channel in the description down below. I suggest you go check that one out if you like to see a more in-depth review of this amazing book. Then, after all, I just may do a separate video. Who can tell at this point in time? What is Blackwood's Blue Sky about? In a small Alaskan town near the Wolverine River, Birdie is trying her best to make a living with her little daughter, Emmeline. By the way, this river, which is a fictionalized version of the Copper River, features in all of Ivey's books. We meet Arthur Nielsen, a recluse with intriguing scars on his face, who behaves somewhat odd. Birdie falls for him, and against all warnings from her friends, she decides to move in with Arthur. Together with Emmeline, she changes town for his remote and isolated cabin in the mountains. While she is reliving her childhood happiness in the middle of nature, Birdie finds that there is more mysterious and dangerous about Arthur than she could have imagined. The writing of Eowyn Ivey is not very flowery, almost efficient, but it still transports the reader to the beauty of Alaska. Tomorrow would be just a bit shorter, winter a little closer, a celebration and a mourning. The chapters written from Emmeline's POV are a wonderful rendition of the world seen through the eyes of a 6-year-old. And because much of the events are narrated through her POV, the reader never gets a sense of what the real truth is. And that is exactly the power of Ivey's writing. She can write a story that is close to fantasy, but in the end, the reader keeps on wondering if what he has read truly happened. While the story unfolds, these wisps of mist keep on blocking a reader's view on reality. I gave Blackwood's Blue Sky 97 points out of 100, a true 5-star. And I believe the novel is just as captivating and enthralling as The Snow Child. With each book of this author, I come to love Alaska more and more. Next I continued with The First Law. I started reading Before They Are Hanged on February 16 and finished it on the 24th. As mentioned, I will be doing a separate video on the trilogy as a whole, so for now I will keep it brief. In short, this second book was more of the same for me. Hardly any overarching story, but great characters that inspire the reader to keep on turning the 570 pages. The dialogues are excellent and the banter is entertaining, although it can be pretty harsh and confronting at times. We get a little glimpse into where the story may take us, but in the end it is still many characters going on quests and fighting battles and wars, trying to survive without any visible inner connection. We know there is, of course, but the author does an excellent job in hiding it from his readers. It is certainly good enough to keep on reading and to want to read the third book as well. But I still find it disappointing that I have to read 1100 pages of excellent prose and great characters without having anything like a ring or a Sauron to put a wrap on it all. I gave Before They Are Hanged 79 points out of 100 and I immediately started reading the final book. Not so much that I couldn't wait any longer, although I enjoyed this trilogy, but mainly because I want to finish it, so I can go on to other books that do tell me what the overarching story is. So, these are the 10 books I read in January and February of 2025. What do you think of the books I've read? I suspect that many of you will disagree with my frugal comments on First Law. I'm truly interested in your thoughts, so that I may learn. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard. you.